how does it feel to
Oh
actually
my gosh.
have a book in your hand? I can't imagine.
Super exciting to be able to just like have your book in your hand, and it's like,
Right.
it's real. This is so real.
What advice would you actually give someone who thinks they want to be a writer, and second, someone who's struggling to write their first book?
The best advice that I've ever gotten, and the best advice that I can give is,
Sean, how does it feel for you to narrate your, what, 2,000, 3,000th audiobook now? How's that feel?
So I'm friends with Michael Kramer. I've known Michael for 25 years. And Michael's got this, his voice is like this, it's like fine scotch. It's just this beautiful baritone.
You, Michael Kramer, and us have that in common, where people come and listen to us for our majestic, lulling voices here on this podcast.
You like to think
Absolutely.
No one
Absolutely.
does. I wanted to ask you about your AI overlords and whether they're going to take your job soon.
There's a couple of main flaws that AI has when it wants to go in this area.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Tutor Ramble, episode 53. I'm your host, Austin. This is your other host.
And I'm Richard here.
We have two very special guests today, very accomplished, and we have the opportunity to speak with them live here. And we have Stephen Guglich, is a husband, a father, a full-time elementary school principal who became the North Dakota Principal of the Year in 2020. And through all that, somehow found time to write his debut novel, Piercing the Veil. And this is book one of the Veil Saga, which releases March 31st. It is a modern epic fantasy book with elements of historical fiction that answers the question, where did the magic go? Cultures across the world have talked about mythos and magic throughout all of history, and the Veil Saga answers that very mysterious question. And we also have Sean Pratt with us, who has been working for over 30 to 35 years as a professional actor in theater, film, television, and does a bunch of voiceovers. He has 9 Audiophile Magazine Earphone Awards and 5 Audie nominations from the Audio Publishers Association. He has narrated over 1,000 audiobooks and counting. Finally, someone who's read more than Richard. Thank you for that, Sean. And one of those books that he did voiceover for was Piercing the Veil by Stephen. And so now these two are very accomplished, and we can't wait to talk to them and get some insight for all of you watching. But they don't seem to be very smart because they came on this podcast. So that was a weird decision, but we welcome you with open arms. Thank you both for joining. We're honored.
thanks for having us. I'm excited.
Yes. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Well, getting right into it, Stephen wanted to ask you a little bit about your book with right off the bat. Where did your inspiration come from when you wrote this book?
Well, the Veil Saga itself is this idea of a reconciliation or a catharsis of our inner child. You know how when you were younger and, magic seemed real, like, there's a possibility one day that, you might see a dragon or something like that, or there might be an elf out there somewhere. And then as you get older and you find out the truth, and magic just isn't what you thought it was going to be. And that's kind of the reconciliation. So for me, being a parent, being a teacher, being an educator, I wanted to rekindle that magic in the form of a fiction story. And that's where the idea of the Veil Saga came in. And the first book sort of tackles that to an extent. And then in book 2 and 3, it'll go even further.
To go into that, you're talking about your life as a father and principal. How did you actually incorporate your life experiences into your writing?
Well, the main character, Jeremy, he's an educator. He's a teacher. I only taught 4th grade for 1 year. Jeremy has taught 4th grade for quite a while. But he's only 28 years old, so he's sort of a younger me in some ways. Not quite. I wanted to be able to write what I know, so that's why I didn't necessarily want to inject myself into the story, but I wanted to be able to write a character. This is the first time I'm writing a novel, so I wanted to be able to write what I know. So I'm an educator. I wrote about an educator.
Fair enough. Absolutely. And we dug into your Twitter. We went back all the way to 2018, and I'm going to read a quote from you here. And you said that the Veil Saga has been ruminating for almost 20 years now. It began as a personal reconciliation of a childhood memory and became the story it is now, with much thanks to my wife who encouraged me to write it. And then also in 2018, you tweeted out saying, I have finished the first draft of part 1 and is now under scrutiny of my critique group. So this has been a huge, long coming book, a big dream. First off, how does it feel to actually have a book in your hand? I can't imagine. And also, go with that.
Yeah, it is super exciting. I mean, I've been like, thanks for digging, but yeah, I have been working on this for a while. I mean, the idea was even before my oldest son was born. The idea came to mind, and I just went with it. I thought it was such a cool idea that nobody has ever done before. And I don't want to go into any spoilers, but that was kind of the angle that I started with, and then it started to become this story. And when I first got the proof copy last month, dude, that was just super exciting to be able to just imagine. Like have your book in your hand, and it's like, It's real. This is so real. It's so cool.
We have to say Richard and I read the book, very impressed by you, and it is very unique. We don't want to give any spoilers to the book. Yeah, incredibly unique. And Sean, how does it feel for you to narrate your 2,000, 3,000th audiobook now? How's that feel for you?
When I first started narrating a million years ago, it seems, in the mid-90s, I did nothing but fiction. So I was doing Westerns and science fiction and fantasy, thrillers and things like that, romance. And I really enjoyed it, but because I was the new guy, the industry was totally different back then. There are so many more platforms for audiobooks. And when I started, it was basically the major publishers or major audiobook publishers. So that's who you worked for. And so because I was the new guy, they gave me a lot of, shall we say, sort of B-list or C-list material, sort of filling their back catalogs. And while it was a lot of fun at first, the plots weren't necessarily all that great. So it was sort of like, oh, look, the butler did it again. And I was still learning how to be a narrator. I came from a theater background, been doing theater since I was 10, and I was transitioning out of theater into film and television and audiobooks. And so you have to learn. There's a real craft to narrating, especially fiction. But I did a lot of fiction early in my career. Then I switched over to mainly nonfiction, which I've done easily, I'm going to guess 600-700 titles of nonfiction.
Wow.
And so every once in a while now I'll have a chance to do a piece of fiction, which is nice. It's a nice sort of change of pace. And I get to sort of exercise those performance muscles again. And so when Stephen contacted me, it was about a little over a year ago. He said, I've heard your work, really think you'd be great for this project. And he pitched it to me. And it sounded really interesting. No spoilers. But I thought, this would be a good change of pace for myself, because I tend to do very dense nonfiction material, which I really love. But once again, you can still have too much of a good thing. So I remember I got the final text like around Christmas time, I'm guessing. Was that right, Stephen?
Yep. Yeah, I think it was right after. Yep.
Yeah, and so I got to settle on the couch and start reading it. And no, I'm not going to give anything around the plot, but I'm reading it in about, I don't know, 30 to 50 pages in. I'm like, oh, there we go. That's new.
That's the reaction we had.
We had the exact same reaction.
Yeah, and I was really surprised. I was like, what is going on here? And that really, because I've done, lots of fantasy pieces where it's sort of, just another slight version of the Lord of the Rings. It's like the Lord of the Shoes or the Lord of the Capes or the magic swords of blah, 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 or whatever. And while they can be fun, you can see how Tolkien has really, and even the Hobbit and some of the Harry Potter motifs are in them. But what I liked about Stevens was he came at it from he used the tropes are there and the themes are there, but he gave it this one little piece that just changed everything. And that's what after I saw that, I'm like, oh, I'm in. Let's do this. This is going to be great. So it was, yeah, it was a lot of fun to be approached about it. Like I said, I probably only do, there was a time I narrated about 50 books a year, basically one a week. But now I do half that many because I teach audiobook narration technique. So of the 25 I might do in a year, maybe 3 or 4 will be fiction. And I'm really glad that this will be the one of the that I'll have done this year for that.
Amazing.
Wow.
Amazing.
I actually wanted to ask you about genres. So you normally do nonfiction books. Which genre do you find the most fun and also the most difficult to narrate?
The most fun.
Besides Stephen's book, that was the most fun.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Actually,
besides Stephen's book, of course.
Of course. The most fun I have, here's, I'm not trying to be cagey. The most fun I have is when the book is well written. You know, Oscar Wilde once said, there's no such thing as a moral or immoral book. Books are either well written or they're not. So I've done really well written material on, I don't know, Wall Street investing or science or arts or a murder mystery. And it's about the quality of the writing that makes it fun. You know, just how clever an author explores an idea. But I do enjoy doing fiction because then I get pull out, as I say, my gallery of funny voices. And, you know, one of the things I teach my students is that you should always be, a good performer is a good mimic, and a good mimic is a good observer. So you're constantly listening to people and cataloging their voices, so you can cast them later on in the pieces you do, you see. So I just literally flew in last night. I was in the East Coast seeing my kids. My children are grown. They live in the Annapolis area in Maryland. And while I'm traveling on the airport, I'm listening to everybody and cataloging, oh, that's what aggravated, tired businessman sounds like. Or, oh, that's what someone from Cornwall in England sounds like. And so I get to catalog those things. And then when it's appropriate, pull it out. But that's also in consultation with the author. So I'd say the fun and the enjoyable part comes in fiction when you can start to really put on those voices and play the scenes.
Well, how did you decide the characters? We'll just stick with the main character for now. How did you find the voice for the main character in Stephen's book, in Piercing the Veil?
Well, Stephen, we had several discussions actually about character voices. So initially, we needed to break those down because we were doing promotional snippets of me narrating so we could help promote the project. So we want to sort of get a feel for those different characters. And so we discussed what kind of voices would fit for certain, like how do all of the elves sound, or or if you have an ogre family, or if you have a family from this part of the country, how do you want them to sound? And so we discussed that. And most of the time we were in alignment, but sometimes I had to sort of show Stephen, like, I think this other voice might be a better choice for this whole group because here's why. There was one group of characters. Initially, he was after sort of an Israeli accent, and I didn't quite know what that meant. And I jokingly said to him, I said, if you're not careful, this whole group of people is going to sound like a bunch of old Jewish men from Queens named Murray. We have to find a different style that still fits within his vision, but still that's easier for me to do. I think nowadays, because of audiobooks and multicast recordings, authors and some listeners think that we are just like a machine that can churn out tons and tons of different characters and accents at a drop of a hat, and that's not the case. There are some voices that are easier, some accents, like there's some accents I can do very easily, and some are just really difficult. But as far as the lead character, he said he wanted that voice to sound pretty much like me, but a little more. Our hero, he's out of his depth through this first piece. He's thrown into this magical world, and he's a young guy, and how would you respond to that? So he wanted that voice to be really close to mine.
Yeah, that was one of the reasons. Sorry, yeah, that was one of the reasons why I selected Sean, because I was looking for a narrator. Like everybody else, I was thinking, oh, I'm going to get Michael Kramer to do this, and as I before I met Sean, Michael Kramer was one of my favorite audiobook narrators, and I was thinking, his voice is too deep. He's got that. I don't think he's going to capture Jeremy in that way. And then I started listening. I listened to Nick Podell. I thought, he might be a good choice. And then I needed a palate cleanser, and I was listening to one of the Westerns that he did. And I heard the voice, and he had that quality, that sort of gentleness that I was looking for with Jeremy. And I'm listening. I'm like, oh, this is good. I got to see what else he's done. So I started looking. Also found out that he reads under the name of Lloyd James. And then I found a fantasy series that he did, and I was listening to that fantasy series, and I'm like, this is the guy. Yeah. This is the guy. And I sent him an email and asked him if he was interested, and the rest is history.
It's funny because casting the central role is really important. So I'm friends with Michael Kramer. I've known Michael for 25 years. And Michael's got his voice is like this. It's like fine scotch. It's just this beautiful baritone, and he's one of the most Zen guys I know. He's a wonderful person. But if he would have brought something totally different to the piece that I did, or a third narrator, right? And so I've spoken to author groups about casting, and I'm like, you have to boil down. If it's a story is told from a central, who is your protagonist, and you want to have, in my opinion, the narrator be as close to that sound as possible, just to make life easy for the narrator, and that the audience grows to identify that voice. So you've got to get that hero voice correct. And then then it becomes how well can they do these other, other accents and characters outside of that, the secondary characters around it.
Well, Sean, you, Michael Kramer, and us have that in common, where people come and listen to us for our majestic, lulling voices here on this podcast.
You like to think
Absolutely.
No one does. The hardest thing for us was getting used to our own voice when hearing it on recording. And you doing this 35 years, you're definitely used to your voice by now. But that was tough. After that first month, did you have that? Do you remember if that was ever an issue for you to hear yourself on recording and go, okay, you sound differently on audio than you do to yourself?
Well, it was a real learning curve. I have a little anecdote about my very first session. I moved down to Washington, D.C. to start my life and my career over again. I've been in New York for about 5 years, working off Broadway and regional theaters, doing classical work. And I landed in D.C. and I thought I had a bunch of theater lined up, and it all fell through. And I was with my girlfriend, living with her at the time, and I was scrambling. So I picked up my paintbrush and my hammer, because I was a carpenter and a painter. That's how I got through college. And so, I still had to pay the bills. But I remembered a conversation I had with an actor while I was doing a play down there who did audiobooks. And he said, well, if you ever are down here and you want, an introduction, I can introduce you to some people. So I called him up, and he introduced me to Grover Gardner, who your listeners might know. Grover's been narrating for well over 30 years. And I met Grover, and he basically gave me a hand getting into the industry. And so he got me my very first book with Blackstone Audio. And it was Cabbages and Kings by O. Henry, a series of short stories. Mm-hmm. So I read the book, I come in, and I think I know what I'm doing. This is back in the days of tape, when we used to narrate on VHS tape in a machine.
Oh my gosh.
And back in those days, you actually ran the equipment yourself. Well, we still run the equipment when we do it ourselves. But so now I'm about to perform for the very first time and run the equipment. And I had a monitor outside the booth, a woman, Bernadette was her name, and she was following along. So if I made a mistake, she could correct it in real time. We could back the tape up and correct it on the tape and then keep going. So I went to Grover's studio, and I blocked off a 3-hour slot to do this. And in 3 hours of work with Bernadette, I did precisely 15 minutes of material.
Oh, Lord.
And so we finished the 3-hour thing. I thank her very much. I'll see you tomorrow. And I get in my car, and I drive back to Northern Virginia, where we were living. And I walk in the door, and I walked in the house and I just collapsed on the rug in the living room, and I'm laying there, you know, like this, staring up at the ceiling. My girlfriend comes over. She's like, "You okay?" And I said, "This is so much fucking harder than I thought it was going to be." And
Oh.
oh, I can swear.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah.
It was so much more than just, of course, reading out loud. And it was a whole different level of skill and technique that I had never realized until that moment. But I had nothing else on my plate, so I had to learn. So I went back the next day and we did 20 minutes, and the next day after that, 25 minutes, and so on. But that's how I learned. But yeah, initially the what you learn when you're performing, it's hard to explain to someone who hasn't been through it. You know, I have a little test I have people to try when they are maybe interested in audiobooks, and that's basically perform a book in your closet for 2 or 3 hours a day. Do that for 2 weeks, and that'll tell you whether or not you really want to do this. There's a real temperament issue along with the technique. So yeah, it's a really tough thing to get started into.
We did see your YouTube video on that from 9 years ago, and that's why we look up to you. You have a video on YouTube with over 100,000 views, so that's our goal. So that is awesome. But Stephen, I'm sure you can relate very much to the 3 hours to get 15 minutes produced. I mean, I'm sure you're sitting on your computer for 3 hours at a time, and sometimes you only get actually very few words done in the long scheme of things. How have you dealt with writer's block or actually getting something done? Because not to show you how much we looked into you and be creepy, but another tweet that you said in the past was, "I get up at 4 a.m. to write for an hour and a half before I have to go to work. It was tough at first, but it's so quiet and peaceful with some prayer and a good cup of coffee. I get some of my best writing done at this time." So you wake up super early, get your coffee going, and does that help you, and does that structure help as well?
So yeah, oh my goodness, when I just remember, you know, back, oh gosh, I don't know how many years ago it was, but when my wife was first encouraging me to write, you know, because I would tell her all these stories, you know, I got this great idea for a story, I got this great idea, and she's like, well, then write it. And I'm like, well, when am I going to have time to write it? And we only had one kid at the time. Now we have four, but you know, and I'm thinking, you know, and I had lesson planning actually I was teaching then. We didn't even have a kid. I was lesson planning and you know, and just trying to, when am I going to have time to write? So, you know, I remember praying about it and just saying, you know, God, I want to be able to write this book. I got to be able to write this book. And so I wound up waking up at 3:30 in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning for a couple of days. And I'm like, oh gosh, I can't sleep. What am I going to do? So I'd sit there and I'd lay in bed. I'd toss and turn and I wait till the alarm goes off at 6 o'clock when it's time to go to work. And it would happen. It would go on for days. And I'm like, wait a minute. How didn't I just get up? Must be the answer to my prayer.
Right.
And I just got up. I got up and started writing. And I just remember that first day I wrote such a great passage and my word count was like over 2,000 words. And I was like, oh, this is it. So then I just started doing it and now it's become a habit. Now I'm up almost every morning at 4 and I get that writing. And well, now I'm marketing for the book, but for this first book, but yeah, that's the deal.
Well, actually, Stephen, I wanted to ask you about the whole process of self-publishing. How did you actually get started with that? What was your decision to go to self-publish rather than traditional publisher? Could you walk us through that?
Sure. Well, honestly, I was pretty confident that this book would sell no matter what. I mean, so I was sort of in the back of my mind. I was thinking, okay, I'll start querying once I have it polished the way that I want. And, you know, I really didn't think I'd have an issue. I mean, I knew I would get rejections, but, you know, J.K. Rowling had over 100 rejections and she finally got picked up. So I wasn't really worried about that. And then I was listening to a webinar from Dave Farland, who's author of the Rune Lord series. And he was also a master teacher he was Brandon Sanderson's teacher back in college. One of the things that was the hardest thing for him was that he knew that the Rune Lords was going to be 3 books. That was it. He knew the story from beginning to end. And his publisher pushed him. You know, they wanted 3 more after that, and then they wanted 2 more after that. And he said those 3 and those extra 5 books that he had to write, they were they were the worst books he's ever written, because he just didn't have the heart for them. They were there, and he said the reviews were, I mean, they weren't bad books, but the reviews weren't as good as the first three because his heart just wasn't in it. And that's what really clinched for me. I didn't want anybody telling me I needed to do more, or I needed to inject this into the story, or I needed to have that. I wanted to be the publisher. I wanted to just write it the way that I wanted and produce it the way that I wanted. Even when I hired my editor, that was the same concept. I wanted him to help me with the craft and everything, and give me ideas along the way. But I didn't want him telling me that I had to do something that I didn't want to do.
Fair enough.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think if I can chime, I think that's reflected in the quality of the writing that he came out with. You can see he has a really clear vision for the story, and it's reflected in the quality of the narrative. Growing up in the theater, oftentimes you did new plays, and sometimes you'd have a new playwright, and you'd spend the whole rehearsal process. They would basically, the play you put up had nothing to do with the play you started with 5 weeks before, because they hadn't really thought it through. And it's just a great story because it's clear. He knows where he wants to go with all these bits and pieces of the narrative, and I think that's in it, because when you perform the piece, I get to live inside the author's head, and so I get to see the quality. It's about the quality of their, and the quality and the sharpness of their intellect with telling the story, because you can have a great idea that's not told well, and or you can have an idea that's okay, but they really put a piece of flair on it. But when you have the two put together, a great idea told well, it's really captivating. And so I'm really excited about what's going to be coming down the line from book 2, because book 1 was so well written. Yeah.
Something I've noticed when reading like one genre kind of back to back to back, and I've read mostly fantasy with sci-fi sprinkled in, is you start picking up patterns quite clearly, and it does start to get you a little jaded because you start noticing them way too often. But something I really liked about your book, Stephen, there was specifically 2 parts that just threw a real twist that I just haven't seen before, and I didn't know where the story was going, which I really enjoyed. So, like the
awesome.
first part with Sean, you mentioned, I think we all had that same reaction of, oh, this is what the book's about.
Yeah.
And so that was a super. And then after that, like I thought, okay, well, now I understand the direction, and then it flipped on you again. And so I definitely enjoy it. Was a unique vision of the story rather than a whole team of writers kind of just putting what works together.
And the one thing we both talked about the book right after, we both completely were in agreement with, the book got better and better as we read on. So you have it structured with 3 parts, almost similar, like Stormlight has part 1 through 5, and and Piercing the Veil set up with part 1, part 2, part 3, and each part just got better for us. And I don't want to influence your own opinion here, but our favorite character was by far Wilt. We love Wilt. And you also write children fantastically, by the way. I thought you wrote children very well. But who is your favorite character to write? And Sean, who is your favorite to narrate?
I'll let Stephen start off, and then I'll come in.
Well, I got to agree with you on Wilt. Wilt was my favorite to write because I was just be able to tap into my inner antagonist there, because he was a lot of fun to write. And then it was hearing Sean do Wilt in the book on the audiobook is awesome. I texted him after hearing when the first Wilt scene, and I texted Sean. I was like, if this becomes a series or a movie, I am going to encourage them to cast you as Wilt in the book. I mean, now I had somebody else in mind for playing Wilt along, as I'm writing this, and then I hear Sean's interpretation of it, and then I'm like, that's Wilt.
Yes.
Yeah, he turned out to be such a cool character, and without
the baddies usually are. I mean, growing up in the theater, because of my face, I always played the young prince, the young lover parts, the good guys. And those guys, they're all weepy and soppy and falling in love for the first time, and blah, blah, blah. but it's the villains, it's the Macbeths, it's the you know, the Iagos that you go, oh my God, there's so much there. And so when I'm reading the book and Thaddeus makes his appearance, of course, from my perspective, when I'm reading a book, I'm starting to play with voices in my head. Like, what's a good voice for that? Because casting a voice is tricky, because sometimes the author's very explicit. They'll say, okay, this guy is really aggressive, 65-year-old heavy smoker from Georgia. Okay, there's the voice. You can put all that to head and you come up with this voice. But sometimes it's more the feel. And so I initially, with a name like Thaddeus Wilt, I'm like, oh, is he like a evil Sauron, Gandalf-y weird thing going on? You know, what was that? And so I was a little stuck. But you know, I'm reading and I'm prepping. I don't make it, you know, everything's sort of up in the air, penciled in, as it were. And then Stephen and I had a conversation, and he told me who he wrote that character after, a very specific actor. And it just so happens I know the actor. You know, I watch his stuff too, and I'm like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. So I went back and I watched some work that actor had done on film and television, just to get the voice back in my head. And the minute it came out of my mouth with the text, I'm like, oh yes, this is perfect. He actually really captured the right sound, and it just took off from there. And yeah, he was by far my favorite character to voice in the entire book.
Oh, I'm glad we're all in agreement on that one.
Good.
Well, I'll never forget. I gave my editor the third draft of the book and to polish and everything, and he said, "I got good news and bad news for you." He said, "The good news is, by far, Thaddeus Wilt is the best character, and the bad news is, by far, Thaddeus Wilt is the best character, because he said your protagonist should be the best character, not your antagonist." So he gave me a few pointers and a few ideas on how to to bring Jeremy out. I mean, I like Jeremy a lot. Jeremy's a great character, but I mean, Thaddeus was created to overshadow anybody else. I mean, you could see, and just his presence, and even Jeremy says it at what point. I mean, Thaddeus is surrounded by these goons that are far more imposing, but there's just something about Thaddeus Wilt that is even more imposing, and it's like, now I picture Sean as the part. So, picture Dwayne, picture Sean, with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson behind him, and there, Thaddeus Wilt is going to be more imposing, and that's the idea. And I know Sean had mentioned the name, just a little tidbit, and you might find out more. But if you do a little bit of research on the name, there's a specific reason why his last name is Wilt. So that's a little teaser there for you.
Well, Stephen, all I ask of you is that if this becomes a TV show or a movie, that Richard and I get to play like a goblin all messed up, and we'll be a side goblin that dies or something. That's all we ask. That's it.
If I have any say in it, I will. I'd be happy to have you guys cast.
Would you rather have this made as a movie or TV show? Do you prefer? I mean, I'm sure you get either. You're going, of course, but if you could pick, what would you do?
I think it would be a better series, because I'm sure you guys noticed. The beginning is a slow burn. It builds. Yep. I mean, like you were saying, it gets better after every part. So the first part, or the first part of part one, is a slow build, and I'm hoping that it is a slow burn and not a boring, boring thing. But so I think it would be much better as a series. I think it would be awesome. Like on
Are you
Netflix
listening,
or
Netflix?
Amazon.
Are you listening, Netflix?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I was just thinking of the characters, especially the main character Jeremy. I think it was a fairly good decision with making him play he's a little overshadowed by Wilt, mainly because I think it's just more realistic with how he's, the fish out of water character. He's brand new to the world, that it would be strange if right out of the gate Jeremy is such a imposing character on the story. And so I imagine second book, third book, he's growing into his own. That's kind of it would be weird if he was just so imposing.
It's like, yes. I mean, look what happened, say, with Luke Skywalker.
Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah.
he needs to start from a place of naivete. That's one of the reasons I like that character so much, because he starts from a place of naivete, and now you got 2 more books for him to evolve into the thing he's supposed to become.
Right.
And that's a
Oh,
great
yeah.
journey. Whereas Thaddeus sort of presents himself, he's already imposing, and it's only later in that you start to hear more. He's really interesting just when you meet him, but you find out other facets of him. But he's set. He's, as a character, it feels like that entity is there. Whereas Jeremy has all this potential to evolve through the rest of the books, and that's great. That's exciting. As an actor, I can tell you that's a nice journey to go on when you're working a series of books like this.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And Sean, have you, after reading all of these books out loud, have you ever been inspired to write your own book? I know you do have one that's more of a tip book, or it's a kind of guidebook to becoming, it's called The Top 10 Differences Between a Successful Actor and a Starving Artist. But have you ever been inspired to write a piece of fiction or a narrative story?
It's really funny you should say that, because working on this piece, I've been knocking around an idea in my head for a long time. So, well, you humor me. So I did a book about 4 years ago called it's a piece of nonfiction called The Doctrine and Ritual of High Magic by Eliphas Levi. It was written in 1851. He was a Jewish Kabbalist in Paris at the time. It was a brand new translation. So the book talks about black magic and spells and paganism and tarot and how to create your own potions. And it's considered a legit book. If you're into any of that, you have a copy of this book. Okay.
Wow.
So I was given a chance it was a very challenging book to turn into audio, but I really enjoyed the way it sort of came out. But it got me to thinking about a story that's been blowing around in my head of a narrator who gets hired to narrate a book like that. But as he's narrating all the spells and things, stuff starts to happen in his world because he's literally abracadabra. He's speaking it into being.
Oh, so I love it.
I was talking to my girlfriend about it recently because I am actually writing a second nonfiction piece for freelance performers about when to take a job and when to turn it down. But that's a nonfiction sort of self-help business book. Right. I'm working on that right as we speak. But this other one now is kicking around my head. And I was thinking about, I was inspired by Stephen's book. I was like, well, heck, this guy is a principal. He's busting his butt working all the, he's got time to write. Why can't I do it? I'm not sure about 4 o'clock in the morning, but the idea.
You take what you can get.
Yeah, exactly. But the idea, I'm inspired. I do have a book kicking around in my head about a narrator who gets hired by some nefarious character to narrate this piece from an ancient manuscript. And in the act of performing it, stuff starts to happen. So there's a bit of Stephen King in there. There's a bit of, some ancient fairy dust floating around or whatever. Well, I don't know.
Let's co-write it, and then we can have it as like as a Veil Saga book. It could be part of the Veil Saga.
So, let's have your people talk to my people, and we'll set up some.
Actually, I thought that was a very interesting thing by the time I got to the end of your book, Stephen, that people can actually submit stories that would be part of a history of the world. And I just thought that was such a cool idea to get fans of the book series kind of involved. Where did that idea come from?
Well, as an educator, one of my things is I want to empower young writers, young readers. So I thought, well, how can I get, how can I inspire kids to write, or anybody to write? I want, the shared world project that you're mentioning, it's open to anybody, but my target audience is really young writers. I want to be able to take in and just produce this anthology, and with the Piercing the Veil and the whole Veil Saga in itself, it's so ripe. There's so many stories out there. I have a short story also that's coming out on March 31st that's based on a Grimm's fairy tale, and it's from the perspective of enchanted creatures rather than from the Grimm's brothers perspective. But it's there's so much out there that is just that answers the question, where did the magic going on? Why are there legends and myths, and what happened to them? So that's kind of where that shared world project came in. If you have an idea, a story that you've read, when you were a kid that was a myth or a legend or a fairy tale, Let's turn it into a Vale Saga story. What was happening? What was really, quote unquote, really happening?
It's really cool. Actually, to follow up that, what advice would you actually give both someone who thinks they want to be a writer and second, someone who's struggling to write their first book?
So I get this question a lot, and the best advice that I've ever gotten and the best advice that I can give is just write. That's what you have a story that's on your heart. You know it's in there. It's brewing. And your mission with that story is to get it on paper or get it on the word processor, whatever, however, but just get it down. Don't worry about the grammar. Don't worry about the structure. Forget about the spelling. Just get the story out there. Because that first chapter, that first draft is yours. If you would have read the first draft of the Vale Saga, you would have you would have laughed. I mean, it's just a matter of getting that story that's on your heart down, and so that you can digest it, you can look it over, and then when you're writing your second draft, you're going to go in and you're going to see, okay, that's when you're going to work on the grammar. That's when you're going to work on the structure and the spelling. And then it's going to start coming together. I'm strange in that sense with as writers. I don't get writer's block, and I also don't have an issue with editing, because what happens is when I'm writing a story, I'm a discovery writer. So when I'm writing, if I get to a part, and I don't call it writer's block, if I get to a part where I get stuck, what I do is I go back and edit. I'll go back, either if I'm stuck on the storyline from the character's POV, I'll go back 2 or 3 chapters in that POV, and I'll edit, and then by the time I get to where I got stuck, I'm good to go. And the same thing with with anybody who writes. It's a process, but forget about all the other things. Don't let grammar, structure, spelling, all that get in your way. Just write.
Isn't it Neil Gaiman who said writing is actually the act of rewriting?
Oh.
It's that you're constantly, it's not, you get it on the paper and then you start, it's like putting I think of writing, when I wrote my book, like you take a lump of clay and you put it on the spinning wheel, and initially it's just this lump of clay, and then you begin to sort of manipulate it and tear out a piece here and slap on something there, but you've got to start with something. Yeah. And like you said, don't worry about the structure or the themes or how clever you need to be. You just get started. And the more you begin to play with it, just the ideas will come. Yeah. Absolutely.
And that's what I'm hoping to do with the Shared World Project. Help those, young people.
I just have to say, when I saw that, I thought that was so clever.
Yes.
Just as to open the project up to other people, it was a great, the businessman in me going, that's a great marketing idea.
Yeah.
Well, I honestly, I didn't think of it as marketing. I wanted,
marketing in a good way, in the sense that you can, it's like think of, say, like the Star Trek series. Now you have all these offshoots, Deep Space Nine, whatever. It's like you can grow the story in different directions. And that's that, but also encouraging young writers to take a piece of this and run with it and see where this character, what's the backstory for Thaddeus Wilt? Maybe somebody could write a really cool story about that.
Right. Yes.
Or this character, that character. I just thought it was wonderful. And it was a very generous act too.
Thank you.
Yeah, seriously, it's like making fanfics part of the canon of the world is genius.
Yes. Yeah. I guess you could look at it that way for sure. Yeah.
And something you mentioned there on how revising and editing for you comes more natural, and is not just natural, but you don't mind it. A lot of authors do mind it. They find it torturous. And actually, one of your inspirations, I know, Brandon Sanderson, his toughest part to getting published was he just wrote books and then hated revising. And so... And it just reminded me of Sanderson because I wanted to give you a chance to say any inspirations of other authors, Sanderson being one of them, but who's really crafted your mind and gotten you to write this book and just love reading in general?
Well, I guess, Sanderson really set the bar for me, but I came to Sanderson, gosh, I maybe only about 5 years ago. So I can't say he inspired me to write this book because I was writing it, but I wasn't a reader when I was young. My dad was a big fantasy fan, and he would read. We had books around the house, but then the idea of picking up something that looks this thick, and spending time reading it when I could just flip the TV on and watch a show. You know, that was hard for me. And then it wasn't until my freshman year of high school when I had my English teacher and I had to write a book report, classic book report. But the nice thing about her assignment was that you could read any book you wanted. The only stipulation is it had to be more than 200 pages, which was still daunting to me at the time. And I'm like, oh man, I don't want to do this. So I just remember agonizing over what book am I going to read? You know, I saw all the books that my dad had in his library, and yeah, maybe I'll read one of those. And then I just happened to be, it got down to the wire, and I happened to be sitting in the school library, and I saw Piers Anthony's A Spell for Chameleon, the first book in the Xanth series. And it fit the requirement. It was just over 200 pages. And I'm like, okay, I like the cover. I'm going to read it. And that was really the first fantasy book that I fell in love with. I mean, I was a fan of fantasy before that, but it was more about the picture books or the movies, or, you know, I grew up watching Conan and Beastmaster and all those corny 80s fantasy movies. And so that was really my first inspiration. And then Terry Brooks' Magic Kingdom for Sale series was another one I really liked. And just all those that were just, you know, I just grew up reading, you know, because I became a voracious reader after reading the first Xanth book. F. Paul Wilson has a great bunch of series, including he's got the Linnaeus Chronicles, which is sort of a fantasy sci-fi, and he's got the Repairman Jack series that I really love, that was more paranormal or urban fantasy. And it just all that kind of in my head, and, you know, that's all. I just loved it all, actually. I couldn't stop reading after that first Xanth book.
I used to read a lot when in elementary school and middle school, and then high school for me, I stopped reading as much. Mm-hmm. But then when I was working a job in security, no technology allowed. I have to sit in an empty room for 8 hours at the night shift too. It was not fun. And then this guy, he handed me the first Stormlight book and said, "Hey, you got the time, might as well." And so that's what got me started. So Brandon Sanderson got me back into reading like several books a month, and it was a lot of fun for me.
Absolutely.
So what Brandon Sanderson did for the Vale Saga is he really just challenged me to take my world building to the next level. I mean, I've always appreciated good books with world building, and one of my pet peeves is reading a book where, you know, it's a fantasy world, it takes place on another planet, but yet they use modern colloquialisms, or they have the same curse words that we have in our world. And when I world build, I look at the culture and I ask myself, okay, how did they come up with that idea? You know, the reason why curse words exist in our world is because they mean something. They meant something to the culture, and they got transferred on. But it wouldn't mean the same in another culture, or the idea of, you know, the cultural, the way people live or the way people do things. So I consider myself a deep world builder mainly because of Brandon Sanderson. He really challenged me. After reading Stormlight, I just blown away.
Speaking of Brandon Sanderson, more recently with his new Secret Works projects that he's been doing that he's releasing this year.
Yeah.
He actually talked about how Audible, he's no longer doing an Audible exclusive for the audiobooks,
right,
for that series, because of how the contracts actually work with Audible, where if you're exclusive to Audible, you get 40%, where if you're not exclusive, that you're just going to Audible and other audiobook platforms, that it goes down to, I believe,
25%.
25%.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to pass it over to you, Sean. What are your thoughts on Audible's business practices when it comes to percentages and how they give significantly less than other platforms?
Well, you know, Audible is owned by Amazon, and let's be fair, guys. I mean, Amazon really isn't making that much money these days, so they need all the help they can get. As far as I'm being ironic, guys. I'm being ironic. It's a crap deal, frankly. You know, they're the 800, like it or not, they've become the 800-pound gorilla, and they can dictate those kinds of terms. And so you have to decide as a business decision, is it easier for your fans, whatever the genre, fiction, nonfiction, is it just easier for them to show up on Audible and find everything they need, all your entire catalog for 40%, because you went exclusive with them? If you decide to do the wider distribution and get the lower rate, you also then you're challenged to find what's going to be the return rate on those smaller platforms. I think it's good for the competition, but it can feel a little scary being the trailblazer as an author going, yeah, I'm going to not take that extra money because I don't want an exclusive with Audible. I want to help these other platforms and have more people come to them. What is the dollar and cents? What does that actually boil down to in numbers? And they're still figuring that out. That answer is still an open question, or the answer to that open question. And so, and it's a very personal question. I've had authors who absolutely will not do an exclusive deal because they're pissed off about the percentage. And then I have other authors who they have such a volume of work, or like in the nonfiction world, the audiobook itself is just a vehicle for something else they were selling. Like they're a business coach, or they sell their own like self-help programs or whatever. So for them, it's about how wide can I get this? Because the audiobook is not the thing I'm actually selling. It's just a marketing device, you see? So there is no, I'm trying to be cagey, but there's no one easy answer to that question. It really depends on the business model you set up. What is the purpose of the books and the audiobooks? That for you, what is the purpose for them? If Stephen decided he didn't want to do an exclusive and to put it on the other ones, will that cost him exposure or not? Maybe he doesn't care. Maybe he's willing to gamble that and say, even at 25%, I think I'll have the followership, the listeners and the readers to make up for the lost revenue over here because I'm doing something with these other people, these other platforms. Yeah, but the 40%, I remember back when it first started, it used to be 60%. And when you narrate, nice. When you through ACX, which is the platform for a lot of Audible material, authors and narrators, it's just a marketplace where they put them together. I was an advisor with the AFTRA, the Union for Radio and Television, when we were working with the ACX to try to come up with a model that would work. And at that time, the percentage was going to be basically the author got 30, the narrator got 30, and then Amazon got the remaining 40. And that quickly went to 50. Now it's down to 40, split between the author and the narrator. So, it's a sore subject among a lot of people as narrators in our industry.
Yeah, it definitely seems kind of like a race to the bottom, but because of Amazon, how big they are, and the market, it seems they have the power to do it.
But like I said, you have to ask yourself, maybe you only have 40%, but if you can sell 10,000 units, if the volume is going to be there because you've got a readership and a followership, then that's great. But if you're a self-published author and you want to get it out to the widest audience possible, then you might be willing to take the lower rate just because you want to get it across all these smaller platforms.
Yeah, especially now because of what Brandon Sanderson did. He really opened the door for us to go wide. I mean, obviously there are some self-published authors out there who are just not going with Audible at all, just like Brandon Sanderson. And I don't know, I certainly couldn't afford to do that. I mean, as with this being the first book, my model or my idea is this: I got to get this book out there wherever anybody can get it. So that's where, it'll be on Audible, but it'll be on every other audio book distribution center there is, including BookFunnel. So there's all that. Audible will start coming up with a better business model. We'll see.
I'm curious, did you start work on Val Saga Book 2 yet?
Yes. So during the final edits, when my editor Patrick Labruto was working on on the final edits, I decided I was going to do to start book 3. So I'm about a third of the way through that one. And one of the reasons why I haven't gotten back to it, well, there's 2 reasons why I haven't gotten back to it since. And that was the last time I think I was writing, that was back in November, right before the Kickstarter. So there's 2 reasons why I didn't get back to it. One is the marketing, because I right now my main time being spent on books is marketing this first book. And the other thing too is that there were several Kickstarter tiers that I had, whereas if the higher tiers, you could actually help me create a character for the second book. So I have 5 people that I'm going to work with to help, who will come up with some characters for the second book, that I got to be able to figure out how to weave them in, because I know where the story's going. I know how book 3 ends. And I know the future beyond that too, is that, I even wrote a little bit of book 4 during NaNoWriMo 2 years ago. Was it 2 years ago? Not this NaNoWriMo, but the NaNoWriMo before that, just to kind of get a palate cleanser, just to kind of get my mind focused on something else, because book 4 is going to take place several hundred years later.
Oh wow!
I'm going to put in my vote now, because I'm forecasting that the fans are going to demand a 3-book series about Thaddeus Wilt. I'm just going to put that out there right now. So
a prequel series, yeah, maybe.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That is certainly true. I would love a origin story for Thaddeus Wilt.
Oh man, okay. I'll have to think on that one.
Did we hear his mind just go into overdrive there? I think we did.
Yeah.
Maybe someone will do it in the shared stories, the shared universe you have, and
That'd be
do the work
if
for
somebody's
you.
got a Thaddeus Wilt idea, I'd be willing, so with that shared world thing, they're gonna, I guess I'm gonna be their guide in helping them craft that story. They'll pitch the idea, and then we'll go from there, and we'll make sure that it fits. It fits to the point where it becomes canon, because you might have an idea, like my son, he's 14 and he's 13 now actually, and he's got an idea. He wants to write a short story for the shared world, and he's got an idea for that as well. And so I told him, he gave me his idea, and I said, well, let's write it up, and then we'll make sure that it fits into the canon of the world.
Absolutely, and it must have felt great. You mentioned your Kickstarter. It must have felt absolutely great to get the support you had. You ended up smashing your $500 goal, destroyed it, and you had a lot of backers. Like, come on, you must be it's euphoria. It just must feel great.
Oh my goodness, that was such a cool thing, and I'll never forget. Like you guys know, I'm a principal, so the first day we're at work. The first day of the Kickstarter was on a Tuesday, and I had to go to work that day, and I'm working, so I can't really follow the Kickstarter. And by 11:30, it was time for me to take a lunch break, and I look at my phone, and it's blown up. My wife is like, "Why aren't you answering me? Are you watching this? Are you seeing this? Are you seeing what's going on?" I had 12 messages from her, all these other messages, and like you said, the support, I could not believe it. The coolest thing, the coolest level of support that I had, I got to share because it was awesome. So there were four $250 tiers that were there, and what you would get with that was a Kickstarter exclusive hardcover, and then you'd also get a chance to create a character with me. So when I got home that day, I'm looking at the different people, and I see a name on there, and I just was blown away, because it was my foster son that I had 20 years ago. 20 years ago. And wow. I just couldn't believe it. I was blown away. I was so humbled. It was so cool. So the amount of support that I got was unbelievable.
I hope that other authors, or people who watch or listen to the podcast, authors take a page from Stephen, what he's done here. Having a Kickstarter campaign for your project, if you can build on it and offer real value to the listeners and the readers, is a great way to help get something going. And
Yes.
I thought that the different levels and the different things he offered with those different tiers was really smart, really clever. And I had no idea what kind of response it was going to get either. And when I checked out the page and, after it'd been up, I was like, oh my God, this is fantastic. It was just so exciting to see. And I was glad that I was able to contribute, some videos of me performing that, I could put up and try to get the thing rolling. But I think it's a very smart marketing strategy to get, to help you, the author, get the time and the resources to produce the work you're after. It's so hard to find time to write or produce or, get the audiobook production and so on. It all costs money and time. And if you can involve the listenership and readership in that, it's a win-win for everybody.
And thank you, Sean. Sean was the one who convinced me to do the Kickstarter, because I wasn't sure what I was going to, I had seen, of course, all the Kickstarters that were going around, and he's like, yeah, do it, go for it. If anything, it'll be just a pre-order. And that's kind of what we publicized it as. This is a pre-order for the Piercing the Veil, and you get some Kickstarter exclusives along with it. So it's exciting.
That's super exciting. And if each of you don't mind, I had a more philosophical, thought-provoking question to ask each of you. And I'll gear this towards Stephen first. And Stephen, I wanted to ask you, so a Christian faith is a big part of your life and your faith in God. And would you say that, or not what would you say about that, but what would you say is the answer to the debate between should you separate the art and the artist? What do you think about that debate surrounding right now with, should you separate who wrote the book, like death of the author, I'm sure you've heard that. Should you separate the author completely for the work, or should you include the author and think of who wrote it when you're reading their piece?
That's an excellent question. And I'm a firm believer in write the story that's on your heart. I mean, I can't turn off who I am. I mean, you guys have read the book. It's obviously, Piercing the Veil is not a Christian book. It's got Christian themes. It's got a few elements in there, but it is by no means a Christian novel. But you write the story that's on your heart. Forget about what everybody else, don't try to inject things that aren't there. You got a story. It's burning in you. Get it out, get it in there. And if people like it, they like it. If they don't, they don't. And that's kind of my idea there. Yeah. And, I couldn't throw my faith away, but, the main characters, none of the main characters in the story are Christians, as you saw. I mean, it's not a faith based book, but I do believe my faith is in there as because one of the things that I live by is my faith and my hope in Jesus Christ. And if with that, hope is a main theme of this book.
Great answer. And for you, Sean, I wanted to ask you about your AI overlords and whether they're going to take your job soon.
I can't do that, Dave. No, the answer is no. Well, first of all, okay, so when we say AI, what we're really meaning is text to speech, right? And it's already here, and it's really useful. When I call CVS to get a prescription filled, it can understand what I'm saying so I can get to the right person or the right thing. It's already here. There are apps now, I've forgotten, there was one I saw on YouTube a while back that, basically designed for college students, where you can take a photograph of a page and it'll narrate the page to you to help you study, basically. But and then what's happening now is you have people like Apple and I know Google and even Amazon are looking around for AI generated audiobooks. And then they're easing it in, going, well, we'll just do the nonfiction because there's no acting in that, which is their first mistake. There is acting involved.
Yeah.
So let's just sequester the fiction off the table, because it's never going to happen. There's no way that AI can understand the psychological nuances of characters speaking back and forth for dialogue. That's one of the other. By the way, one of the other things I really enjoyed about Stephen's book was the dialogue has snappy. Because when I'm performing it, I'm focused on the dialogue. I'm working on a murder mystery series. The second book should be coming up soon. And what I love about the series is he writes really good dialogue. And AI would not be able to even begin to know how to put that dialogue together to make it realistic. But in the world of nonfiction, when it comes to narrating, a lot of people think that nonfiction equals non-acting, and that's just not the case. At its core, there's a couple of main flaws that AI has when it wants to go in this area. And let's be honest here. There is no demand from authors. There is no demand from the listeners for AI to narrate audiobooks. None. It's about a bunch of people in a boardroom going, we need another yacht. And they're trying to figure out how to do that. Let's just be honest. That's what it is, okay? And then they try to get, reporters or pundits to say, yeah, we should do this and it lower the cost of audiobooks and we'll put those artists in their place and their whatever. And that's all ridiculousness. Mm-hmm. At its core, AI does not have an opinion about what it's telling you, but the author did, right? Mm-hmm. I'm narrating this book called Your Future Self for Hachette. And it's about how to develop techniques to help you become a better person over time by being able to see that future self. So if you want to lose weight or you want to quit smoking or you want to have a business someday, what to do in the now for your future self. And it's a really funny self-help book. So my job is to find those adjectives and adverbs, the opinion the author has about the topic as they travel through the story. AI can't do that. Okay? It has no opinion about what it's saying. So that's an Achilles heel it will never overcome, in my opinion. In fact, think about it, guys. One of the whole tropes of Star Trek, The Next Generation, was that Mr. Data was trying to figure out how to be more human. Mm-hmm. And the cornerstone of that is the second issue. AI does not have a sense of humor or irony or sarcasm, right? Imagine how nuanced the comedy is. I've had more than and Stephen mentioned this too. We were trading notes and he said, I didn't know I wrote a joke there. And I said, well, you did, you're brilliant. So, a good narrator can tell a great story even when the author didn't write one. In this case, Steve wrote a great story. So my job was a lot easier, but there's always these little moments that I, as the artist, go, oh, I can make that funny.
Right. Mm-hmm.
That's a funny exchange right there if it's done in a certain way. AI doesn't have that. And it never will. And by the time you were to hire an engineer to somehow figure out how to do that, I didn't even know how, you could have hired me for a fraction of the cost. So, no, I don't think AI is going to take my job away. It'll take over textbooks. It might take over some e-learning. It's definitely doing text to voice right now, for phone trees and things. But no, it can't tell a story.
Oh, that's bad news because I was hoping to place Richard with some bot or something. This is just it's not the same.
Well, actually, a more specific question, because I believe I saw a couple articles talking about how some of these companies have in the contract for the narrators and voice actors where they're actually own the voice of the voice actor going forward. And so the fear from some narrators was that they do a book or two and then the company can actually use their voice in automated, use their actual words for an AI voice recording.
Yeah, we just had a huge blow up with that with our union. And we went back to Audible and Amazon and a number of places. And we said, this has, define what that means. And as far as I understand it, they've resolved that issue, that they don't own my voice. And once again, even if they did, okay, let's say
they wouldn't get the timing right.
They wouldn't get the time. Let's say Steve were to steal my voice for another whole series over here because he and Jeff Bezos are all conniving together. Yeah. Once again, AI, you can program my voice to sound sort of like my voice. It gets into that uncanny valley, as we call it, where it's almost perfect, but you can still tell something's amiss. But then on top of that, what about the humor? What about the pathos? What about the drama? And even, once again, even in nonfiction, right? You could take the quality of my voice. I've heard it done. I've seen a machine do it as an experiment, but it lacks all of the understanding of the text. It doesn't. My computer voice has no opinion about what I'm telling you. And over time, you pick up on that, which is why one of the many flaws is cognition. They found again and again with AI that people can listen to something, but they don't remember what they heard. Why? Because the machine follows into things like the tempo of the read stays the same, the cadence stays the same. And what that does over time is your brain goes into autopilot. It doesn't change up the read enough. And the read is changed by the emotion behind the voice. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. So this was a huge issue a few months ago, and the union was all over it about this very issue. But once again, I can't imagine wanting to listen to a book done by AI.
Yeah, well, it goes back to my original reason for contacting Sean. He had that voice, that quality that I was looking for. I mean, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Speechify. There's an app that you can read where it'll read anything, and it'll read it in Snoop Dogg's voice. Well, I mean, as funny as that is for maybe a few paragraphs, you're not going to want to listen to the Stormlight archives with Snoop Dogg's voice. Yeah. It's like Sean said, it's just not going to. You're not going to be able to pay attention long enough. I mean, at first it's funny, but after that, forget it.
But like I said, I challenge you to. It's the cognition factor, because it doesn't change organically. It's just the words keep coming at you. And over time, that the way your brains are wired is that when your brain senses an ongoing pattern, either visual or auditory, it goes into autopilot to save energy. That's why you can go to your favorite grocery store and shop and do all your shopping and talk to someone on your phone and never miss a beat. Why? You've made that pattern 1,000 times. So if the brain goes, oh, the words are bouncing along at the same pattern, on a subconscious level, your brain just switches off. You have to try harder to pay attention to it. And AI, and the reason it would change is for an organic emotional reason. And AI can't manufacture that.
Interesting. Definitely far more hopeful. Far more hopeful for the future.
Oh, I'm not. Listen, I'm not worried. I have my students. You know, I teach narration technique and for audiobooks, and a lot of my students just lose their mind when a new article comes out. I have to sort of talk them off the ledge, and I'm like, look, it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen, because once again, even if AI could sort of get close, once again, let me ask you, would you get a book knowing it was done by AI? It might be fun for a novelty, but through the book, you'd be like, yeah, it was okay. It wasn't as dynamic as it needed to be. It wasn't as individual. You know, I'd rather get Mike Kramer to do it as opposed to Mike Kramer, the computer voice.
Right.
It seems to be that AI, both for writing, if you're trying to have AI write an essay or AI do some type of narration, the best it could really do is C+. It does C+ work on kind of a lot of aspects where it does pretty impressively well. But ultimately, if you want an A paper, if you want, you know, A+ Michael Kramer, Sean Pratt narration, AI just can't do it.
No.
Yeah, it just can't, because, like you said, it's not. You're not going to remember it. You're not going to enjoy it. And there's a certain. It's in the same universe as going all the way back to Jurassic Park with Jeff Goldblum talking about the chaos theory. The fact that you could, you hire Mike Kramer because he has a certain the unpredictable quality that is Mike Kramer is what you listen for. The way he'll take a character or a story in a certain way, like Scott Brick or Hillary Huber or me. You hire us because we have something that it's an intangible something that can't be boiled down to an algorithm. And that's what you look for in a performance. You listen for in this case.
Yeah, that's fascinating to me.
We were talking before a few weeks ago on AI in the future, and it does. I'm on the stance of I think we're on the cusp of it. I think there will be a future, and it may take a few decades from now, but I think AI writing will probably get close enough that it will be hard to tell. Like it'll be very difficult to tell of a fantasy author because a lot of fiction is patterns. And I think AI, given enough data could really recognize those patterns.
And I was definitely on the more Sean side here with I was the more optimistic, naive one, but also now that you said it, Sean, I feel better about my opinion, so thank you.
I would also say even with writing, because what makes a new writer so great is that they come at a topic. Well, like let's wrap this up and tie it back to Stephen here. It's like the fact that Stephen took a trope of, you know, the elves and the goblins and magic and all that stuff, and he inserted two things in there. Well, one thing for sure that we know, the central thing that we're teasing the audience with, that alone AI would not have been able to come up with. Just that little bit of chaos invention, that's what makes the book so compelling. And yes, I understand. I have friends who read, you know, those like romance novels or mystery novels, and they're literally built on a formula. And they love that because they just turn their mind off and they enjoy the story. And I appreciate that. There's a market for it. So maybe that's where AI goes with it. But for truly good writing, you need someone to come along and throw a little chaos in there with a new idea that suddenly jolts us. It's like the first time I ever read Stephen King. I'd never read anything like that in my entire life. Or the first time I read, you know, there's some other writers. You just go, that's such a clever way of telling a story. And I don't see how AI is going to be able to come. They'll be mimicking the things that came before. And that's all they'll do. I'm trying to help you out with your job prospects here, Steve. So
hey, thanks. Sean, thank you for the video title that audiobook professional Sean Pratt dunks on Richard. It's like,
you gotta get those clicks, baby.
Oh yeah,
those clicks on here.
Thank you both so much for coming on to this and us taking so much of your time. I want to give you each the floor to promote anything that you've got going on. Sean, I'll give the floor to you first, and we'll end with the author, Stephen. But Sean, anything you want to promote and tell people about?
Let's see. Promote. Well, for those of you who are interested in perhaps getting into audiobook narration, I teach audiobook narration from the nonfiction angle, and I teach my students how to make a living as narrators. If you'd like to find out more about what I do, you can go to SeanPrattPresents.com and look me up there to see what my program's like. In the meantime, I'm just a working narrator like everybody else. I've got a business book to do, then a religious book to do, and then I think a detective series to start. So I'm all over the place. Really excited about Stephen's work. I can't wait for the next one. I think this is going to be the start of a great 3-book series. And then hopefully that Thaddeus Wilt 5-book series will be following just after that.
Yeah.
And the beginning. And hopefully, I know Stephen will say this, but I know he's planning on something resembling sort of a press tour. And we're both hoping that if our calendars align, that I'll be able to join him at some places where he's going. So fingers crossed on that.
Yeah. That's great. We'll be sure to have that link down below in the description.
Yes.
Thank you.
And Stephen, the floor is yours.
Well, you can find out more about me and the Veil Saga at StephenGooglich.com, or I made it a little simpler for you, theveilsaga.com. It's easier for people to remember. And I'm all over social media. I'm on all the social media channels, and just I love talking about fiction and writing, and of course my upcoming book, which comes out on March 31st. I have a virtual launch that will be on Facebook coming up, and I have a couple of really awesome prizes for that day. If people are interested in joining for that, that would be a great event. And then, like Sean said, this July, I am hoping to be doing a book tour all across the Midwest and East Coast, and signing books all along the way.
All right. Well, thank you guys again so much for coming on. And
thanks for having us.
Yeah,
for everyone watching and listening, we'll be back next week. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and do all that fun stuff.
Thanks everybody
see you
for
guys
watching.
Next week.
See ya.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.